The phone rang at 12:43 in the morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Knoxville, Tennessee, still wearing my good black dress, still holding a cold cup of coffee I'd poured 2 hours earlier and never touched. My right hip ached from standing too long at the graveside. My good shoes were still on. I hadn't had the energy to take them off. The screen lit up. Melissa. My daughter. I answered on the first ring. Mom, her voice cracked down the middle like old wood. I sat up straighter. Melissa, what is it? What happened? A long pause, then something I hadn't heard from my daughter in years. Real crying. Not the careful, controlled kind she used when she wanted me to know she was tired without actually being vulnerable. This was different. This came from somewhere deeper. Mom, why are you on the news? I looked across the kitchen toward the small television on the counter. I'd turned it on earlier for company. The volume was low. Some overnight anchor was talking against a backdrop of blue and red. What are you talking about? Channel 4, Channel 9. Kevin found a clip online 20 minutes ago and now it's everywhere. Mom, why didn't you tell me where you were tonight? I set down the cold coffee. Because 6 hours earlier, my daughter had told me not to come for Thanksgiving. No, wait, let me back up. Because the real story didn't start tonight. It started the way most painful things start, quietly, over the phone, with words that were chosen carefully enough to sound reasonable. Part 2, 3 days before. My name is Ruth Calloway. I'm 71 years old. I spent 34 years as a licensed practical nurse in the cardiac unit of a regional hospital in eastern Tennessee. I retired 4 years ago, which sounds like rest but mostly feels like rearranging furniture in an empty house. My husband, Gerald, died 18 months ago, pancreatic cancer. Fast and brutal, the way that cancer always is. We had 41 years together. Good years, hard years, years I wouldn't trade for anything, and years I'd give a great deal to have back and do differently. When Gerald died, the house we'd shared in Knoxville became something I didn't have a word for. Not empty, not sad exactly, just reduced, like a song playing at half volume in the wrong key. My daughter Melissa is 44. She lives across town. She has 2 kids, Bryce, who is 8, and Audra, who just turned 6, and a husband named Kevin Marsh who works in commercial real estate and has opinions about everything, including opinions about things he knows very little about. Kevin is not a bad man. I want to say that plainly and mean it. He's not cruel, not dishonest, not unkind in obvious ways. He's simply the kind of person who believes that every room he enters becomes a slightly better room because he's in it. He has firm handshakes, loud laughter, and the particular confidence of a man who has never had a reason to doubt himself for very long. Melissa met him 4 years after her first marriage ended. She'd been cautious for a long time, and then she wasn't. I understood. I even liked him at first. I made the effort because she was happy and because she asked me to. But something had shifted in the past year. I noticed it first at Easter. Then at Bryce's birthday party in July. Then at a Sunday dinner in September where Kevin explained to me, slowly and carefully, as though I might have trouble following along, why nurses in cardiac units were being replaced by technology. I had smiled. I had nodded. I had quietly spent the drive home talking to Gerald in my head the way I still sometimes do. 3 days before my father-in-law's burial, Melissa called. My father-in-law, Walter Calloway, 91 years old, Gerald's father and the last elder of a family that had slowly, over decades, grown smaller in the way families do. Walter had lived in his own house until the end, with a visiting nurse and the stubbornness of a man who had survived the Korean War and wasn't about to be moved somewhere with beige hallways and scheduled activities. Walter had asked for me specifically in his final weeks. His nurse, a quiet young woman named Frances, had called me more than once. He's more settled when you're there, Mrs. Calloway. He asks for you. I had gone, of course I had. I sat with him in the evenings after his favorite television programs. I checked his medications. I held his hand when the nights got long and he was afraid. He called me Ruthie Asterisk, which Gerald had also done, and every time he said it, something in my chest ached in a way I couldn't explain. He died on a Wednesday morning. The burial was scheduled for Saturday. On Wednesday afternoon, While I was still sitting with my own grief and trying to organize the details that death always brings, phone calls, flowers, arrangements, casseroles from the church, Melissa called. "Hi, Mama." Her voice had something underneath it, a careful arrangement. "Hi, sweetheart, how are you holding up?" "I'm okay, Kevin's been wonderful." A pause. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about Saturday, after the service." "Of course." Another pause, this one longer. "Kevin's parents are coming in from Chattanooga. They drove in specifically to support us. And, well, we thought it made sense to have the family dinner at our place afterward." "That sounds fine," I said. "And Kevin thinks, we think, it might be better if this particular gathering was just his side of things, so that he feels fully included." The room got very quiet. I was standing in Walter's kitchen, actually. I'd come over to water his plants and collect his mail, the way I had every week for the past year. His reading glasses were still on the kitchen table. A library book he'd never finish was still open beside them. "Melissa," I said slowly. "Walter was Gerald's father. He was my family." "I know, Mama, and I'm so sorry about Walter. I really am. But Kevin's parents made a long drive, and Kevin wants them to feel like family," I said. Silence. "Yes," she said quietly, "he does." I looked at Walter's glasses. I looked at the library book. I looked at the window, where the late November light was coming through the curtains he'd chosen with Gerald's mother 40 years ago, curtains that had probably never been replaced. "Okay," I said. "Mom." "I understand, sweetheart." "Are you sure?" The lie came out smoothly. "Of course." We said a few more words, nothing of importance, then the call ended. I stood in Walter's kitchen for a long time. The clock on his wall had a second hand that made a small clicking sound with every tick. I counted the clicks. I lost count. I started again. Then I went home and began figuring out what to do with a Saturday evening that had just been given back to me. Part 3, what I did with the night. The burial was at 2 in the afternoon, on a Saturday in late November. Knoxville does November cold and gray with particular commitment. The sky above the cemetery looked like the inside of a pewter bowl. The ground was hard. The minister spoke well. There were maybe 30 people, neighbors and old friends and distant Calloway relatives I hadn't seen since Gerald's funeral 18 months before. I stood at the grave and held Walter's sister Me's hand. Me is 87 and doesn't see well, but she was determined to be there, and I was glad she was. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Melissa stood on the other side of the grave with Kevin and the children. She caught my eye once. The look she gave me was complicated, apology and discomfort woven together in a way I recognized. I gave her a small nod. I did not make it difficult. After the burial, people drifted to their cars. Me's daughter came to collect her. The minister shook my hand and said something kind. The director from the funeral home, a small, precise man named Albright, offered an umbrella against the light drizzle that had started. And then Frances, Walter's nurse, appeared at my elbow. Frances was 26, with dark hair and quiet eyes. She had a way of standing very still that I recognized from decades in nursing, the stillness of someone trained to absorb difficult things without flinching. She touched my arm gently, and she said something that I've thought about many times since. She said, "Mrs. Calloway, he left something for you, at the house. He made me promise I'd make sure you went before anyone else did." I looked at her. "He said to tell you that he wanted you to have it before it got lost in the shuffle." She hesitated. His words, he was very clear. "What is it?" "I think you should see it yourself," she said. So instead of driving home and eating leftovers and spending the evening alone in a quiet house, I drove to Walter's. The house was cold when I unlocked the door. Quiet in the way old houses get when their occupant is gone, not just empty but waiting, somehow, in a way that new construction never does. Frances had told me to look in the study. Walter's study was a small room off the hallway. Bookshelves, an old wooden desk, a filing cabinet in the corner. Gerald had loved this room as a boy. He'd told me that once, that he used to sneak in and read his father's National Geographics by the window. On the desk was a wooden box, not fancy, walnut, by the look of it, with simple brass hinges. The kind of box that holds something important without trying to announce it. Inside was a letter. Ruthie. Gerald always said you were the steadiest person he'd ever known. He was right. I've been watching you hold this family together since he died, and I want you to know that I noticed. I want you to know that it mattered. The house goes to the estate as it should, but the things inside it that belong to Gerald, his grandfather's watch, the photographs, the letters he kept, those belong with you. I've told the attorney. It's done. You were a good wife to my son. You've been a good daughter to me. Don't let anybody make you feel like you're standing on the outside of your own life. Love, Walter *. I sat down in his chair. I don't know how long I sat there. At some point, I heard a sound. Not dramatic, just the house settling, the way old houses do, the way living things do when they've been carrying something heavy for a long time. I folded Walter's letter. I put it in my coat pocket. And then, because I needed something to do, and because sitting in the dark wasn't going to serve anyone, I looked around the house and started doing what nurses do when there is nothing else to be done. I started to take care of things. Part 4, the call. Walter's neighborhood sat next to an older part of Knoxville, where the roads followed the geography instead of a grid. Hills and curves and stretches of road where river fog could settle without much warning. I'd been at the house for 2 hours when I heard tires on gravel outside. A young couple, mid-30s, I guessed. Their car had slid on the wet curve 3 houses down and come to rest against an old stone wall. Not catastrophic, but the woman was 8 months pregnant, and the driver's side door wasn't opening properly, and the husband's voice had the particular high, controlled panic of someone trying very hard not to panic. I got there before I'd fully decided to. I introduced myself. I told them help was on the way. I'd already called 911 from Walter's telephone, the old landline he'd refused to give up, and which I was suddenly glad existed. I helped the woman out of the passenger side carefully, one hand supporting her back, one steadying her arm, the way I'd helped thousands of patients in and out of beds and chairs and examination tables across 34 years. She was frightened and cold, and her name was Danielle. "You've done this before," she said, looking at me with some surprise. 34 years in cardiac, I said. She laughed, a short surprised sound, and I think that laugh helped her more than anything else I did. The paramedics arrived 8 minutes later. The police 4 minutes after that. A local news van, scanner listeners, the way they always are, arrived somewhere in between. I answered a few questions from a young reporter, a woman in her late 20s with cold hands and a professional composure that I respected. She asked me how I'd happened to be there. I explained about Walter's house, 3 doors down. She asked if I had family waiting for me tonight. I heard myself answer before I thought about it. "Not tonight," I said. She looked at me with something careful in her expression. "Oh, no holiday plans." "My daughter asked me not to come this year." I said it the way I might report a patient's temperature, factually, without editorializing. She's trying to make her husband's family feel at home. The reporter looked at me for a moment, then she nodded and thanked me. I drove back to Walter's house, collected my coat and purse and the letter from the desk, and locked the door behind me. By the time I got home, my hip hurt, my good shoes were damp, and I was deeply, thoroughly tired. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. I took Walter's letter out of my pocket and read it again. Don't let anybody make you feel like you're standing on the outside of your own life. I sat with that for a while. Then my phone lit up. Melissa. Part 5, what happened next? That first call ended without resolution. Not with a fight, there was no fight. Melissa was crying and confused and sorry in the way people are sorry when they've been caught rather than when they've truly understood. I answered her questions. I told her I was fine. I told her Danielle and the baby were fine. I told her the paramedics had handled everything. She asked why I hadn't told her where I was. I said, very gently, that she had made it fairly clear where she preferred I not be that evening, and that the rest of the night had simply happened the way life does, around the edges of what was planned. The silence after that was longer than any silence we'd had in years. I said goodnight, I meant it kindly. I went to bed. In the morning, My phone had 43 messages. Former colleagues from the hospital, women from my church circle, a neighbor from 3 streets over. My friend Caroline from nursing school, who I hadn't spoken to in 8 months. People whose names I barely recognized from community organizations I'd joined in the first year after Gerald died, then slowly drifted away from when I'd started measuring my energy more carefully. The clip had circulated. The 30 seconds where I'd told the reporter, without drama or visible emotion, that my daughter had asked me not to come this year, that she was helping her husband's family feel at home. 20 seconds, 43 messages. The responses were not what I expected. Not outrage, not sensation. Something quieter which I found harder to absorb. I thought I was the only one who'd been through something like this. My son hasn't invited me to Christmas in 3 years. I never said it out loud before. I cried when I heard you say that, not because it's sad, because someone finally said the true thing. Grief shared in comment sections by strangers who needed somewhere to put it. I read every message. I responded to what I could. I drank 3 cups of coffee and called Caroline back, and we talked for an hour and a half about things we should have talked about months ago. Then I called Melissa. She answered immediately, "Mom." "I'm not calling to discuss the news story," I said. "I'm calling because I have some things I need to say, and I'd like to say them without an audience." "Of course, yes, please." I told her that I loved her. I told her that was not conditional and would not change. I told her that what she had asked of me the week before had hurt me in a way I hadn't fully understood until I was sitting alone in Walter's house, reading a letter from a 91-year-old man who had noticed what she hadn't. She cried. I let her. Then I told her something important. "Melissa," I said, "I'm not asking you to choose between me and Kevin. I'm asking you to stop choosing Kevin's comfort over my dignity. Those are very different things." Another long silence. Then, "I know, Mama, I know." That was enough for one conversation. It didn't fix everything. Anyone who expects one conversation to fix years of accumulated distance is asking the wrong thing from a single phone call. But it was a beginning. I recognized beginnings. I'd spent 3 decades watching people come back from things that looked unsurvivable, and I knew what the first breath looked like. Part 6, the months after. January arrived and took its time. I made some changes. Quiet ones, the kind nobody around you notices until later, when it becomes clear that you've moved furniture they didn't realize was yours. I called Walter's attorney, a woman named Shirley Holt who had a direct manner and an organized mind. We reviewed the bequest, the watch, the photographs, the letters Gerald had kept in a cedar box in Walter's study, letters I hadn't known existed, letters from their early years that made me understand Gerald differently, more fully, in a way I was grateful for even though it ached. I also updated my own documents, not out of anger, out of clarity, the way Walter's letter had given me clarity. A significant portion of my estate was already designated for Bryce and Audra's education, held in trust. I kept that. I kept what I'd planned for Melissa, but I added a new designation, a contribution to the Cardiac Care Wing's nursing scholarship fund at the hospital where I'd spent 34 years. A scholarship in Gerald's name, and in Walter's. Not revenge, purpose. I also started volunteering again. In the first year after Gerald died, I'd signed on with a county program that provided care navigation assistance to elderly residents managing chronic illness alone. I'd been fully committed for 6 months, and then gradually, without deciding to, I'd pulled back. There was always a reason. Energy, hip pain, the sense that I had my own grief to manage before I helped anyone with theirs. In February, I called the program coordinator and said I wanted back in. Her name was Patricia. She didn't ask why I'd been away. She said, "Can you start Thursday?" I started Thursday. The work was not glamorous, sitting with people in small apartments while we went through their medication lists, helping them write down questions for their doctors, sitting in waiting rooms when they had no one else to sit with them, listening, mostly, which is what nursing had always been, at its core, beneath all the training and the tools and the procedures, listening carefully enough to hear what wasn't being said. I was good at it. I'd always been good at it. And I'd let myself forget that, somewhere in the smallness that grief can make of a person. In March, Melissa asked if she could bring the children over on a Saturday. I said yes. We spent the afternoon making soup. Bryce and Audra climbed on the kitchen counter and argued over who got to stir the pot, and Melissa and I talked in the careful way we'd learned, not skating over things, not dwelling either. Finding the middle distance where honesty and kindness can coexist if you're both willing to work for it. Kevin did not come. I don't know whose decision that was. I didn't ask. When they were leaving, Audra wrapped her arms around my waist and said, "Grandma Ruth, do you know what my favorite thing in the whole house is?" "Tell me." The picture of Grandpa Gerald by the lamp, because he looks like he's happy right now. It was a photograph from maybe 15 years ago. Gerald in the backyard in summer, looking over his shoulder at something off camera, laughing. Whatever had made him laugh, I couldn't remember anymore. But the laugh was there, real and specific and his. He was, I said. I held Audra a moment longer than necessary. He really was. Part 7, the recognition. Spring came, and with it, a letter from the County Health Department. Community Care Recognition, Award, Senior Volunteer Excellence. I put it on the kitchen table and looked at it for 3 days before I called Patricia to ask if she'd had something to do with it. She had. She was unrepentant. "You've logged 240 hours, Ruth, in under 2 years of program history. And the families you've worked with have been asking when you're coming back every week since January." I hadn't known that. 240 hours, I said. "People notice," she said, "even when you don't." The awards ceremony was scheduled for a Thursday evening in April at the County Civic Hall. One guest. I looked at the invitation for a long time. Melissa expected to be asked. I could tell by the way she mentioned it, careful and angled, asking me how I felt about the ceremony, whether I was nervous, whether I'd decided what I was wearing. I had decided. I called Frances, Walter's nurse, the young woman who had met me at the grave and sent me to his study. She answered on the second ring. "Frances," I said, "I'd like you to come with me to something if you're willing. I'd like to tell you why." She was quiet for a moment, then she said yes. The evening was mild for April in Tennessee. Frances wore a blue dress. I wore a charcoal suit I'd bought for Gerald's memorial and had avoided since, and which fit me differently now, not worse, just differently, the way I was different. The ceremony was modest and genuine, which is the best kind. Teachers, a young man who'd started a food pantry from a church parking lot, a retired firefighter who'd spent years coaching youth swimming. People doing ordinary work in the margins of ordinary lives. When they called my name and described what they described, I looked at the ceiling for a moment because it seemed less exposing than looking at faces. The host, a county commissioner with a kind voice, asked me one question at the end. "Mrs. Calloway, in your experience, what do people need most when they're navigating serious illness alone?" I thought about Walter's reading glasses on the kitchen table. I thought about Danielle on the wet roadside, 8 months pregnant and frightened, and steadied by a single calm voice telling her that help was coming. I thought about 34 years of hospital rooms and the particular quality of attention that people need at their most reduced. They need someone to be present without needing anything in return, I said. They need someone in the room who isn't leaving. Applause. Frances squeezed my hand. Afterward, Melissa found me in the lobby. She was alone, no Kevin. The children were with Kevin's mother. She had come alone, which told me something. She stood in front of me for a moment. She looked like she was working something out. Then she said, "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Yes." "I found Walter's letter." She stopped. "It was in the box of his things. I was helping sort through some of the estate paperwork, and I found a copy he'd kept." I waited. "He wrote you a letter that night, the night of the burial." Her voice was careful and careful and careful, and then it wasn't. "He told you not to let anyone make you feel like you're standing on the outside of your own life." The lobby hummed around us. "He was right," Melissa said, "and I'm the reason he needed to say it." No excuses. No mention of Kevin's preferences or holiday logistics or family dynamics or any of the reasonable-sounding words that had preceded the conversation in which she'd asked me to sit Christmas out. Just, I'm the reason he needed to say it. The sincerity of it hit me in the sternum. Thank you, I said. She looked surprised. That's all. What else would there be? Her eyes filled. I thought you'd be angry. I'm not angry, Melissa. I said it simply, because it was simply true. I'm tired of being smaller than I actually am. That's different from anger. She nodded, slowly, the way you nod when something rearranges itself. We stood together a moment longer, not hugging yet, just standing, learning to be in the same space again at a new and more honest distance. Then she said, I'd like us to have dinner, just us, soon. I'd like that too. And Mom, she hesitated. I told Kevin that next year, whatever holiday we're hosting, you're there. That's not negotiable. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. I said, we'll see. Not yes, not no, we'll see. Because trust is not the same as love, and love was never in question. But trust had to be rebuilt stone by stone in the ordinary weather of ordinary weeks, and that work was just beginning. She understood. I could see it on her face, not disappointment, but acceptance, the kind that signals something real. Francis appeared at my elbow, ready. Almost. I turned back to Melissa one more time. Come on Sunday, bring the kids, we'll make the soup again. She smiled, small but real. We'll be there. Epilogue. It's June now. My hip still announces rain before the weather does. Walter's grandfather's watch sits on the dresser in the bedroom, next to Gerald's photograph. Bryce has been to the house 4 Sundays in a row and has strong opinions about what kind of crackers are better, opinions which are wrong but which I enjoy hearing. Francis joined the county care program as a full-time coordinator. Somewhere in the logistics of getting her hired, Patricia and I had lunch 3 times. We've become friends in the pragmatic, unsentimentally honest way that women past 60 sometimes can. I still volunteer on Thursdays. I still sit in waiting rooms. I still listen to people tell me things they haven't found a way to tell anyone else. Kevin and I have not repaired everything. I'm not sure everything can be repaired. But he shook my hand at Bryce's soccer game last month, and there was something different in it, less performance, more uncertainty, which is actually an improvement. Uncertainty means he's thinking. Thinking means there's a chance. Melissa and I have dinner once a month now, just us. Last week, she brought the soup pot over, and we made a new batch together in my kitchen, the way we had as a family when she was young, before the years had stretched us into the shapes we'd gotten used to. We talked about Gerald, about Walter, about what we'd done well and what we hadn't, and what we hoped the next years might look like. At some point, Audra wandered in from the living room and climbed up onto the counter, the way 6-year-olds insist on doing. Can I stir? She asked. When it's ready, I said. How will you know when it's ready? I thought about Walter's letter in my pocket on the night of the burial. I thought about Francis at the grave, telling me he was waiting. I thought about the wet roadside and Danielle's frightened eyes settling into something calmer. I thought about the award on the counter that I still hadn't found a place to hang because it felt strange to hang something like that on your own wall. You know when it's ready, I said, when it smells like something worth staying for. Audra considered this with the absolute seriousness of someone who has not yet learned to find things unreasonable. Okay, she said, I'll wait. I looked at my daughter across the kitchen. She was looking back at me. Me too, Melissa said softly. I didn't answer, I just turned back to the stove. Outside, the June evening was warm and long. The birds Gerald had always loved were loud in the yard. The window over the sink needed washing. The soup smelled like something worth staying for. I am 71 years old. I am a nurse, a widow, a grandmother, a daughter-in-law, a volunteer, a friend, a woman who stood at a graveside in good shoes and received a letter from an old man who noticed. I have been overlooked. I have been reduced. I have sat alone in a quiet house and counted the clicks of a clock and been too tired to be angry. I am done apologizing for taking up space. And if anyone out there knows that particular exhaustion, the one that comes from years of loving people who forgot to look back, I hope you know this. You are allowed to stop shrinking. The people who matter will find their way to the table. And the ones who need to be reminded, let them be reminded. Walter would have said it better, But then, Walter had 91 years to practice. I'm working on it. If this story stayed with you, share yours. Someone out there needs to hear that they're not alone.